The sleepy town of Roseville, Oregon, was normally a haven of tranquility, nestled beneath vast pine trees and crisscrossed by winding cobblestone streets. A town where everyone knew everyone's name, where stories of old crept through the autumn fog like whispers in the night. But beneath the comfortable surface of Roseville's small-town life, a tragedy was waiting to unfold. It had all started a few months earlier with Sarah Lancaster, a librarian known for her soft-spoken demeanor and radiant smile. Sarah was the kind of person everyone warmed to a kind heart, a dedicated worker, and a woman who lit up every room she entered. Sarah had only been in Roseville for about a year, having relocated from Portland, Oregon, to start fresh after a difficult breakup. For Sarah, this small-town life felt like a healing balm. She quickly settled into the rhythm of her new job at the town's public library and became a fixture in the local community. But there was one thing she hadn't expected when moving to Roseville: Daniel Blackwood. Daniel, in his early 30s, was an architect with a quiet reputation in town. With his piercing eyes and charming smile, he immediately caught Sarah's attention. He had that alluring mystery about him, kind but distant, cultured yet reserved. Daniel was used to being around people, but the rare few who earned his favor never knew him fully. He preferred his life alone, devoid of complications, until Sarah changed everything. They met at a town event, where Sarah volunteered to help organize the local book fair. Their brief interactions at the event were polite, pleasant, yet unremarkable. But something between them clicked in a way that neither could quite explain. Daniel attended the book fair to support his cousin, who was involved in the event, but his eyes kept returning to Sarah as she moved from one task to the next. She was radiant, but in a way that spoke of untouched depths. It didn't take long before he became an eager visitor to the library, under the pretense of picking up books, but, in truth, trying to find ways to continue their conversations. At first, Sarah was flattered by his attention. He brought her flowers now and then, and admired the literature she recommended. Soon, the two of them began having long conversations about art, life, and the occasional philosophical discourse. For Sarah, Daniel seemed perfect, a man of many talents and thoughtful gestures. He was the ideal romantic partner, so gentle in his affection, it was easy to feel swept off her feet. But there was one problem. Sarah wasn't the only one who noticed Daniel. The first sign that something wasn't quite right came when Sarah's close friend and fellow librarian, Amy, mentioned a strange occurrence. "I saw Daniel waiting outside the library for you today," Amy had said nonchalantly, almost as though it wasn't unusual. "It's probably nothing," Sarah had replied, brushing off the comment with a shrug. "He probably had some work to do nearby." But Amy's concern grew as Sarah started to see less and less of her friend after those late-night shifts. By now, Sarah and Daniel had begun their secret affair, still quiet, still hushed, unnoticed by anyone but them. The city's distant murmurs faded against the background of their intimate, stolen moments. Daniel would drop by Sarah's small rented apartment, taking her out to dinners on obscure nights. But something about his presence became strangely possessive over time. Daniel had started making an effort to carve out all the spaces between Sarah and her world. Conversations about her friends dwindled, replaced by vague but constant suggestions to spend more time together. At first, Sarah adored his passionate nature. Daniel showered her with gestures of love, rare texts in the middle of the night, filled with adoration, flowers that sat on her windowsill week after week. Yet, gradually, those tokens of affection felt less like presents and more like expectations, until they weighed on Sarah. The moments of joy became tainted by the pressure of maintaining Daniel's growing obsession with her. He had slowly woven himself into every aspect of her life, until escaping from his grasp was no longer a possibility. Sarah had never intended for things to spiral so far, but in those early days, she had still found a spark of hope. She believed that with a little space, they could reset their relationship, find balance once again. Yet Daniel wasn't the type to let go easily. The more she pulled away, the more he clung to her presence. His calls began to exceed the boundaries of normalcy. Texts left unanswered became moments of silence laced with guilt, with growing unease in Sarah's chest. Finally, there came a day when Sarah realized she had to make a choice. Daniel needed to be removed from her life for good. No more indirect hints, no more soft excuses. She would confront him and tell him the truth. She was ending the affair. Sarah was heartbroken, but she had to protect herself. She had begun to find comfort in herself, learning to heal the emotional scars from her past. But when she confronted Daniel, he couldn't bear it. He had begun to believe that she was his irrevocably, eternally his, and with her choice to leave, his delusion shattered. Their final conversation should have been a moment of mutual understanding. Daniel had quietly, with the steely calm of someone who knew their soul had been cast aside, asked her to reconsider. Yet, Sarah knew it was already too late. His kindness had begun its descent into something insidious. When Sarah told him to leave, to never return, Daniel's world came crashing down. He began to act erratically, at first from the shadows. He would leave notes for her at the library, at her apartment door, each one more cryptic and unsettling than the last. Some spoke of his eternal love, some of his righteous anger that Sarah could never truly know his heart. By now, Sarah was living in constant fear. He was no longer the man she once admired, but something else entirely, an unhinged version of love, one that suffocated all sense of reason. His letters soon turned into phone calls, filled with accusations and empty promises. "You are mine, Sarah. You'll see," Daniel would say in those late-night calls that Sarah eventually blocked. But when Sarah went to the local courthouse on the evening before her death to request a restraining order, it was too late. By then, Daniel had completely crossed the threshold, his obsession no longer confined to letters or calls. Something inside him snapped as soon as he saw her name on the restraining order form. Sarah was not just rejecting him, she was erasing him from her life entirely. That evening, after Sarah left the courthouse, Daniel stalked her, shadowing her every move. That final night would be Sarah's last. As she walked alone, fear gnawing at her insides, Daniel confronted her by the old mill on the outskirts of town. What happened there was a blur of twisted passion and madness. Sarah did not scream, she had no time. Daniel's cold determination carried him to the place of his own destruction, and in one swift movement, Sarah was dead, her body left beneath the haunted oak trees, a single rose placed lovingly beside her. Inspector Vex arrived on the scene shortly after, noting the haunting placement of the rose. It was a sign, but Vex couldn't immediately tell which. Whoever had committed the crime had orchestrated it with care, with the same passion Daniel had once showered Sarah with. It wasn't just murder, it was a tragic manifestation of love transformed into an irreversible obsession. Investigating further, Vex soon found the journal filled with Daniel's chaotic writings. Expressions of love, of ownership, of an inflexible vision of what he thought their future could have been. Vex read on, disturbed, as the story unfolded in written confessions, signing each entry with "Forever yours, D." Everything in Daniel's life was framed around Sarah's absence and his right to fill that void at any cost. 2 days later, Daniel was arrested, standing outside his apartment door with that same blank expression, almost as though the charge could not penetrate the self-constructed reality that Sarah was truly gone. He spoke with chilling calmness, admitting to the crime, explaining that Sarah's death was, in his mind, a form of salvation. In his heart, he had been saving her by making her realize they were destined for one another, even in death. It took 2 weeks before Sarah's funeral, and with it, the shroud of sorrow that covered the town. For Roseville, it would never be the same again. And for Sarah's family, her friends, and even her colleagues at the library, life without her was now a bitter void. The haunting remains of an affair gone wrong lingered in every corner, reminding them that even love, the purest of emotions, could become as lethal as a blade when distorted by the mind's darkness. Here's the end of story. If you've been riveted by this chilling tale of twisted love, obsession, and mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Inspector Vex Files, where the darkest corners of human desire are unraveled with each new case. Ring that notification bell so you never miss another haunting tale.